It's the week ending Friday the 8th of November, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Donald Trump winning the popular vote and the swing states to secure his place as 47th President of the USA, Kemi Badenoch becoming the first black woman to lead the Conservative Party, and the death of legendary record producer Quincy Jones at the age of 91. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from The Week magazine is assistant editor Leaf Arbuthnot, and we welcome back deputy editor of money-saving expert Gary Cafell and former political editor of the Sunday Mirror Vincent Moss. Everyone, I would like your one-word assessment, please, on the US election.
Difficult.
Difficult is a good word, Vincent.
Dangerous.
Dangerous, nice. And Gary?
Eye-opening. I'm hyphenating that one, so I'm counting that as one.
OK, well, that's dealt with all of our commentary on the most important news of the week, because we're here to shine a light on everything else. Vincent, you're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Well, this is the week New Yorkers were told not to flush the loo.
But we also need your help, New Yorkers. Something simple as not having the water run while we brush our teeth, and other ways of ensuring we're not watering the lawn too frequently and often, but also just being precautious. For every gallon we save, that is the gallons that we're going to be able to fill our pools and carry out other activities throughout the summer.
New York Mayor Eric Adams, in a video he posted on Saturday, you can tell he's the New York Mayor because you can hear the police sirens in the background, he's standing on the street corner, but he's talking about water for swimming pools, Vincent. Is that the story?
Yeah, it's a bit bizarre. They have got a terrible water shortage in New York. Now, you wouldn't have thought so, surrounded by water everywhere, but they've had their driest October for 150 years, completely the opposite of what we've been seeing going on in Spain and Europe. So all those millions of people there, they've just had 0.02 centimetres of rain in the last month in Central Park, and they normally get about 11 centimetres at this time of the year. Now, as I was saying, it's the driest October, but for a city that uses 1 billion litres of water a day, it's a huge problem. So there you heard the Mayor, Eric Adams, saying, turn the tap off when you brush your teeth, don't flush the loo if you don't need to, and other water-saving tips, like that iconic image we always see of New York where the water hydrants are always gushing. They've got a lot of leaks. They want to stop those leaks. So they've got a problem, but maybe they don't quite get saving water yet, because as the Mayor was saying, if the idea is to save water so you've got plenty to fill up your swimming pools, I'm not quite sure they've got water conservation. But beneath all of that is a really serious message, because we expect drought orders in perhaps some other places in the world, but when it starts hitting big cities, well-run cities theoretically like New York, what does it mean for London? What does it mean for other areas? And one of the things that's exacerbated it, particularly in New York, is the world's longest underwater tunnel, which is about, I think, 89 miles, brings water in from the Catskill Mountains to the northern reservoirs of New York. And they're finally upgrading that, spending a couple of billion quid upgrading that. But that means that's out of circulation. That's put further pressure on the water supply. Now, whether or not New Yorkers will actually listen, who knows? But it's just really interesting that for the first time that any of my friends in New York can remember, they're now under effectively kind of drought provision orders.
Yes. I mean, one of the questions that might be asked, Leaf, when it comes to whether or not New Yorkers will listen is whether or not New Yorkers will listen to him, to that mayor. He's been in the spotlight for some other issues recently.
Yeah, so in September, the New York Mayor, Eric Adams, who of course is a Democrat, was indicted on a bunch of charges, and some quite serious ones, including bribery and fraud charges. He's alleged to have accepted illegal gifts worth over $100,000 from Turkish citizens and one, at least, Turkish government official. And so for many people, Eric Adams is a fairly tainted figure, and he's been pretty profligate, seemingly, with other people's money. Those are the charges against him, at least. And so people, hearing from him, turn off your tap when you're washing your hands, don't flush the loo unnecessarily. They might not really want to do what he says, given he doesn't seem to have particularly behaved in a way that most people consider proper himself.
Yeah, what has the reaction been to this, Vincent, from New Yorkers?
Well, pretty relaxed, really. They don't seem to be changing their behaviour. I mean, it's a very sort of city where people are more aware than perhaps in other parts of America about climate change and the issues. But I don't think there's been that big behavioural change. But what people have noticed is it is really, really mild. It's unusually mild at the moment. They've had no rain at all. It's very much a city of four seasons, New York, and it's been very, very mild. And if this continues, they may have no choice but to listen to the mayor. And Leaf's right, he's not the most popular mayor in town. Well, he's the only mayor in town. But if this continues much longer, then there's going to be a serious problem in New York.
And Gary, as Vincent was alluding to earlier, you hear a story like this, whether it's in New York or, as we discussed on the show a few episodes ago in Australia, a similar story about water conservation, and you start thinking about how it might affect us, how it affects the rest of the world. How is the UK's water infrastructure, and can we expect to be asked to use less water soon?
Yeah, we're talking about New York, but this could just as easily be us, and we all have to be very mindful of what we're using. To try and combat this, UK water regulator Ofwat has set out a £88 billion investment plan to improve services and the environment. That's a 5-year plan running from next April all the way to 2030. Now, the idea being this money is spent to tackle issues like stopping the leaks, reducing pollution into rivers, lakes and the seas, those horrible scenes that we've seen recently. Now, 6 billion of this will go towards securing water supplies, so progressing 9 new reservoirs, 7 large-scale water transfer schemes, obviously all with the aim to put us in a good position to make sure that we aren't having the struggles that perhaps other cities are having. Now, you walk along the streets, don't you? You see these. We mentioned the New York hydrants, but so often you see leaks in the UK as well. And how frustrating is it as you as a consumer? You're doing your bit at home. You're turning your tap off, and you see the pipes pumping out water with leaks here, there, and everywhere. Companies will be ordered to replace around 8,000 kilometres of water mains pipes under this scheme. That's a 400% increase compared with the current 5-year period.
And these water companies are all privatised. What does that mean for our bills?
So, unfortunately, as part of this, Ofwat has provisionally said bills will rise an average of 21% over the next 5 years, and that's before inflation is added on top of that. Now, worryingly, a survey by the Consumer Council for Water this week actually said 18% of households were already struggling with their bills, and 40% said they would struggle to afford these new rises. 54% of people said they have to cut back on non-essentials just to be able to pay for these increased water bills. So we're in a really difficult situation, I think, at the moment, where everybody recognises we need to be better at conserving water, but when you see water companies in England and Wales almost doubling their profits since 2019, I think it's clear that the water companies need to do a little bit more rather than putting all of that burden on consumers who are already feeling the pinch.
Yeah, and our reservoirs, Leaf, I was quite shocked to read just how old they are. I mean, like our sewage system, they go back decades.
Yeah, there hasn't been a new reservoir built in England in many years, and yet we've seen the population massively increase, and it's really truly depressing in what is a country that is like literally famous around the world for being extremely wet. That we're having this conversation. And as Vincent said, New York is not known for being a dry place, but as global warming bites, we're seeing changes in the weather and extra pressure on systems that are kind of creaking, and there's been kind of stagnating wage increases, and so you just wonder how much people have how much kind of room people have to spend more on their bills.
And in the States, Vincent, a new president coming along, the return of the old president, who is sceptical at best about man-made climate change. Do you think that under Trump we could see more of this kind of thing in the USA?
Well, yes, his famous slogan is drill, 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 baby, drill, isn't it? So he's not a big fan of supporting climate change, and whether he'll be investing in the infrastructure that America needs in the same way we do. They've got sort of bridges that are falling over and terrible infrastructure issues, and that's what it needs. I mean, as Leaf was alluding to, I don't think there's been a UK reservoir built since 1992, which I think was in Derbyshire, Carsington, I think, and there are plans for more underway, but these Western economies in America and the UK are in very similar states when it comes to things things like water and infrastructure. Everybody knows they need replacing, and everybody knows that things need to happen. But either a combination of lack of investment, or even in our country, in particular in the UK, people are opposed to things, even new reservoirs. And I would have thought a new reservoir would be rather a beautiful thing to have next door to you. Not everybody's a fan of them. So there are plans underway to have these added at places like I think there's plans for more in Cheddar, and down in Portsmouth there's one being built. But these kind of massive infrastructure projects, it's the balance between we know we need them, but at the end of the day, it's us, the customers, that have to pay, and there's a resistance there that Gary highlighted, because almost certainly bills will go up.
Yeah, so obviously we're talking about the burden being put on consumers, but there is a couple of things consumers can do to keep a little bit more money in their pocket. With water, it's not like a utility where you switch providers, like your broadband, like your energy to save. You have to stay with the same provider. However, it's all about how you're billed. So essentially, it's worth looking at if it's worth getting a water meter. Now, if you're somebody who has a big house and doesn't have many people living in it, as most bills were estimated, it's likely you could save by switching to a water meter, because essentially what the water company does says, right, you've got a 4-bedroom house, I expect a lot of people in this house. But if there's only a couple of people in there, have a look at getting a water meter, because that could be one way to save a significant amount of cash.
And for New Yorkers, whether they cut down on their water consumption or not, Leaf, are they going to notice this change?
Well, some of them might. Some people who've got very, very sensitive taste buds might. New York water has traditionally been called by locals, obviously, the champagne of tap waters, because it is unfiltered and it's, flown down from the Catskills, and it's apparently very nice. But there is a concern.
I imagine the tap water in Champagne in France is better than it is in New York City.
I would say probably. And actually, I was in New York a couple of weeks ago, and I was drinking the tap water, and it was quite nice.
Okay.
But there is worry that with this change coming, that even things like bagels, which are made in New York with water, obviously they're very reliant on water, will change, because New York's very soft water is apparently crucial to these bagels tasting really good. Some people think that these fears are overblown, and actually the bagels will be completely fine. But jury's out.
We're talking about climate change and devastation for the world's cities, but some people feel the fears are overblown about the bagels, everybody. Don't worry. Coming up next, how is the signal on your phone right now? If it's bad, find out why. That's after this. Okay, Gary, it's your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Will a mega merger mean mobile misery is a thing of the past?
Ever notice your phone struggling to load the Lime app just when you found a bike with full charge, no trash in the bucket, and functioning pedals? Or your WhatsApp chat has the spinning wheel of death? Or you finally made it to the front of the queue for that gig that you've been so excited for months, but you forgot to take a screenshot of the ticket beforehand and now your email won't load? Well, it's not just you. London's phone signal is worse than it used to be.
A video posted by Time Out London in October on TikTok. Gary, bad signal. Not unusual for those of us living in the countryside, but now in the cities as well.
Absolutely, yeah. We're all facing that at the moment, and hopefully, there's an acquisition that's looking likely now that hopefully could put an end to some of the problems that we are facing. So this week we've heard that the £15 billion merger between two of the UK's biggest mobile networks finally looks set to get the green light. So after initially raising concerns last year when this was first launched, the Competition and Markets Authority this week said the merger between Vodafone and Free could actually be pro-competitive if they stick to various legally binding commitments they've set out this week. And now those commitments are generally concerned around investing in the UK's mobile infrastructure and also protecting consumers from price hikes. Now this would see 27 million mobile customers all come under one provider. That would leave just 3 major networks in the UK.
And why would that improve the signal?
So this deal was first announced in June last year. The two groups said they would invest £11 billion over 10 years to do what they describe as create one of Europe's most advanced standalone 5G networks. Now, this was obviously clearly to try and placate the CMA, who were clearly going to go investigate this and just see what it does for competition. Now, their original findings in September were concerned around that the merger could lead to higher prices for customers and actually harm the position of some mobile virtual network operators. Now, these are the smaller networks, the likes of Sky Mobile, Leica, that piggyback off the signals of the big 4 networks. And they often offer cheaper deals. And actually Free is one of the major networks that offers some of the cheapest tariffs at the moment. So that was a real concern of what does that mean for consumer bills. Now, the CMA has now set a list of requirements for this deal to go ahead. Now, this makes the networks commit to freezing the prices of certain tariffs for several years, and the duration of this freeze will actually be linked to delivery of the promised network upgrade. So it's in their interest to make this rollout happen quicker. If they don't, then these tariff freezes will continue for longer. And they're saying that as part of this, they must upgrade all of their cell sites across the UK. That's 25 to 30,000 sites. Working with Ofcom, looking at sites in urban areas and rural areas. So hopefully this would then spark other firms into life, and we may all benefit from better coverage all round. But I think it's clear that we do need some action fast.
Yeah, I mean, that hopefully is doing quite a lot of work in that sentence, isn't it, Vincent? And you can understand the scepticism that customers might have about this merger because, you know, apropos the last story we were just discussing with the water companies and there being no choice. I mean, if you're down to just 4 big networks, the experience that we all have is that when that happens, bills ultimately go up, customer service gets worse, there's less choice, there's less competition. How is that good for people?
Well, that's right. I mean, the natural instinct is more people in the market, more choice means drives down prices. We see it with supermarkets. And I remember when Uber came into the taxi market, we were told that that would drive down prices, and it did for a while. But now the prices are pretty much up to the price of other cabs, and the shrinking of the market generally doesn't do a good thing. And I think we've seen with recent surveys that still London and most of the UK, when it comes to 5G, we're in 10th place, I think, in Europe, behind major capitals. We're a long way behind other cities. So it's all very well upgrading the coverage, but you can still ring people in lots of parts of the UK, and the coverage is weak and it's poor, and it really does need to improve. And it's hard to see, despite their sort of warm words, how a kind of shrinking of the number of choices on offer will boost both prices and for consumers and, more importantly, quality.
Yeah, it's interesting to talk about the cities, actually, Leaf, as I mentioned earlier. You know, I live in leafy bits of rural Hertfordshire, and so maybe you wouldn't expect my signal to be particularly amazing, but it's so bad that I have to do all my calls on WhatsApp because I can't get a mobile signal. But it's now the case that people are anecdotally saying, actually, when they go into London, when they go into Manchester, it's just as bad as it is out in the country. Why is that?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I've been in parts of London and been sort of holding my phone up trying to catch a few bars. Some phones have a sort of automatically try and get 5G, even if it's on sort of 1 bar, rather than plump for sort of, you know, 4G, 3G type thing when they'd actually be able to get more signals. So that can be a frustrating problem. But it's kind of crazy that in a world capital, you know, London, you can still be struggling to get signal. And it makes me think that, you know, we've been struggling with our productivity for years. Perhaps this is a factor. We haven't been able to upgrade our phone networks enough. And that's, you know, one of the reasons why 5G is so bad. But another one is that the planning system apparently makes it quite difficult to erect these masts for better mobile coverage. It's famously difficult to get reservoirs built in the UK. It's also difficult to get phone masts built. And I really hope that the new government, which has shown some kind of interest in trying to speed things up, actually manages to get it together and do that.
Yeah, and that new government, Gary, has been talking all about growth in business, hasn't it? But, you know, not having mobile internet to a decent standard is now an absolutely fundamental thing for business in a way that it wasn't back in the days where the only thing that was important was a landline and a broadband connection. I mean, now if you're taking payments, you need a mobile signal so that you can process them. If you're running a social media account out and about, you need to be able to upload in quality from where you are instantly. It's a big deal.
It is, yeah. I mean, you can't walk down the street, can you, without somebody using their mobile for some reason or another. And I think this is what we're also highlighting. You know, we're aware a little bit more of how important our phones are to us, how important a mobile network is to us, and that is why we're noticing it a little bit more. You know, I think 5G as well is particularly difficult because I think it's a little bit harder to cut through walls or cut through various objects. It blocks it. So I think that's the reason why sometimes with this 5G it's not as good as we perhaps were hoping it might be at this stage. But the government is aware of this, and in the autumn budget, the Labour government has committed £500 million to improve broadband speed and mobile coverage across the UK. And this plays into Vodafone and Free because they're saying, look, we know you've got targets to hit. Give us the green light for this merger, and we promise we'll do our best to help you reach those targets. You know, they're saying on their own they just don't have pockets deep enough and can't collaborate well enough to be able to help support this rollout. But as a joint force, they are saying that they can speed up this deployment across the country.
And Vincent, what is the experience elsewhere in the world? How much better is mobile internet if you're not in the UK?
It's better in lots of other European cities. I mean, for example, in when it comes to download speeds, we're sort of a long way behind places like Lisbon, Barcelona and Munich and places like that. Although Munich is very bad, actually. Munich's the second worst when it comes to 5G download speeds. Lots of European cities and other places do better. And where there's a will, I mean, in Cornwall, for example, there was a big effort to put in super fast broadband down there and drive speeds up because the mobile coverage was so bad. At least people, as you were alluding to, could connect via WhatsApp, and there was a way around it. But without the will, and it may be that these companies are just using this as potentially as an excuse to sort of drive up profits further, but there needs to be a will, particularly to drive mobile coverage into rural areas. But then we get to the infrastructure issue, which is nobody wants a big phone mast in a beautiful part of the countryside, tends to be in a rural area, and that's another problem.
And a fascinating part of this story, Gary, which I just had not thought of until you forwarded us some links around this today, is the impact that the ban on Huawei in UK infrastructure may have had on our depleting signal.
Yeah, so back in 2020, we started removing these devices from our infrastructure due to a sort of a so-called risk to national security. Essentially, we followed suit after the USA did similar. And they were fundamental to our 5G network. Providing various equipment and that. And that, when you remove that, you can see why this rollout has been delayed, because we just don't have the vendors like them to actually replace that. So you've taken one bit out, and you're still working to these quite tough targets. We're one arm behind your back. So I think that's definitely contributed to the problem that we're facing.
What's really unfortunate is that we don't really know how much the Huawei ban has affected and will continue to affect 5G rollout. So I feel like we're dealing with a world where we just haven't been given enough information. How upset should we be about the 5G ban if it's going to hold back, the UK's economy over the next few years? Or should we see it as a small sacrifice? So I think it's really unfortunate that it's such a murky area.
And Gary, I'm sure many people will be heading down to your website and other price comparison websites that give financial advice about, where to move their contract to if they want to switch mobile network. But what's new in 2024? What should we be aware of now if we are looking around to move provider?
Well, first of all, check your contract, because there are 14 million of us out of contract on our mobile plans. Now, if that is you are probably overpaying, and it's time to look for a new deal. Now, if you're somebody that, like me, that you don't feel like you need the latest phone all the time, and you're quite happy with the handset that you do have, look at a SIM-only deal. There's some crazily cheap deals at the moment out there. For about £5 a month, you can get more than enough data than most people can use. So SIM-only deal is the way to go to save the most amount of cash. If you do need a new handset, though, around Black Friday is a good time, but do not go directly to the networks. Most often, that will not get you the best deal. So pop onto a comparison site, and that will scale the whole market. So, quite a lot of us, by tradition, just call up our network, get a recontract every 2 years. That's not the cheapest way. Pop on a comparison site, and you can get a view of the whole market and hopefully save some serious cash.
Gary, I'm feeling really grateful to you right now, because I have paid off my phone. And I've got this been haunted by this feeling that I'm paying way too much for my phone contract. So I'm going to go and research after this podcast and get myself a cheaper deal. And I'm really grateful. Maybe I'll send you some money in the post.
Do you want to know what's up next? I do. That's after this. Leaf, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for forever and ever? Amen.
Should you get married to avoid getting depressed?
It's the day before Jack's horror-themed wedding, and bride Becca has just found out he's customised the princess dress she's always dreamed of wearing.
Oh no! Are you okay? No. What could he have done? Oh wow!
Oh my god! Oh, that's beautiful.
Oh, it's lovely.
Just wait. Do you want to see the back?
Yeah. I see down at the back.
Oh, what?
Oh my god!
What is that?
What is that?
Bride-to-be Becca and friends in shock at what her future husband Jack has done to her horror-themed wedding dress in a clip from Don't Tell the Bride, shared on Halloween. What story does this relate to tenuously, Leaf?
Well, very tenuously, and I'd like to clarify that in that clip, her wedding train, the kind of bit, the back of her dress is covered in what looks like bloody handprints. So it's not the dream wedding dress, I would say.
Don't know what you're talking about. Surely what every little girl dreams of.
So this relates to a study that was published in Nature Human Behaviour this week. So it's quite a major journal. And it analysed data from over 100,000 participants in 7 countries that included the UK and China and the US. And after taking into account various factors, it found that people who don't live with a partner who aren't married have an 86% higher chance of having depression than those who do. So
Wow.
It's basically saying
86%?
Yeah, it's a pretty striking figure. It's one really important thing that comes up that came up when I was looking into this study is that it actually, the way that they decide who is married is interesting. It's not just people who've literally gone to the registry office and got married. It's people who are in marriage-like situations. For instance, if they're cohabiting, you don't have to actually necessarily be technically married. But if you're in a relationship, in a long-term relationship, and you're living with your partner, then you count for the purposes of this study as a married person, and therefore are less likely to be depressed than someone who is single, and much, much less likely to be depressed than someone who is divorced or separated.
Okay, maybe it's not a massive surprise, Vincent. People sort of by definition who cohabit with someone else might have found someone else and are therefore happier than people who don't. But obviously, there are a lot of people in loveless marriages. There are a lot of people who are in abusive relationships. I mean, you can't really just take from this one study, can you, that to cure depression, get married?
No, that's right. It's not the ultimate solution. Not everybody, as you say, who's together is happy. But I would say a lot of personal happiness comes down to finance and how your finances are sorted out. And if you are single, you do pay effectively what is a single person's penalty, whether that's your council tax, laughingly called a discount. It's only 25%. In my view, it should be 50% because you're on your own potentially. But also hotel rooms, travel, insurance, Netflix subscriptions. Anything in life really is cheaper when shared by 2 people. In London, for example, to rent a single room probably be in excess of £1,000 in Zone 1 or Zone 2. But if you're a couple and you're sharing a 1-bedroom flat, makes far more economic sense, and you're splitting all the bills. So I would say that money's an issue, and if you are single, you're paying a lot more for everything, and that doesn't affect your mental health in a positive way often.
Yes, that's interesting. And Gary, very much your area, isn't it? There are actually financial incentives, aren't there, that were brought in by Cameron's Conservative government to get married?
There was, yeah, and I feel like I should start this segment as somebody who's married myself, and I know my wife listens to this, by saying, I did not get married for financial reasons. I'm very happy. Just putting that out there for when she listens to this. So, yeah, this is not the reason I got married. However, there are benefits to being married. Now, if you are in an unmarried couple, in law, that often means nothing at all. Even if you've lived together for decades, you've got loads of children, under inheritance law, that just doesn't matter. If you're not married, don't have a civil partnership, your relationship has no status. So, essentially, if one person dies, the other may not actually get the house. So, it could cause a lot of problems. That's what makes a will even more important. There are tax advantages as well to being married, especially with inheritance tax. Anything left to a spouse, so married or a single partner, is exempt from inheritance tax. So essentially you can leave whatever you want to them and there's no tax on it. But this doesn't apply to those who are just cohabiting, no matter how long you've been together. It's married or civil partnership which counts. Funny enough, we highlighted this issue on Money Saving Expert recently, and would you believe we had a lovely success in from somebody who actually used our advice to say to their partner, who they'd been proposing to for years, listen, this is the advantages, and they said yes because of the financial implications of doing so.
Okay, so that's the financial picture, Leaf, but I'm sure that's not the reason you chose this story as your story of the week. You're recently married yourself.
Very recently, yeah.
Well, what do you take from this?
Well, I have to say that the story left me with a strong sense of how unfair society is towards people who aren't married. But also a lot of people who are single would actually like to be married. It's just that they haven't found the person with whom to settle down. I'm in my 30s and I think it's a very common experience in London for women to find that they are ready to settle down and, find a kind of a committed relationship, but that they're not really finding the right partners, around to be able to make that commitment. So I found it sort of left me kind of really furious, because it's like, okay, clearly the science suggests that, there's definitely an advantage to being married, but you're kind of left powerless if you can't actually find that person. It's also another thing that I found really interesting and kind of classic about the study is that it found that this effect of, you being more likely to be depressed if you're not married was more pronounced among men. Sometimes men have a bit of a tendency to basically allow their wives to control their social lives, and they sort of don't make as much effort with their male friends. Maybe they don't talk about, famously they don't talk about their feelings. I mean, sometimes they do, but I think women have a slightly better capacity to maintain social relationships, even when they're in a couple. And so the data would suggest that when you're not married as a woman, you're not necessarily, as likely to get depressed, partly because you've got that sort of social infrastructure around you, whereas men are perhaps less good at constructing it. So even if men are showing sort of an unwillingness to commit, it's actually often in their interests to have a very stable relationship, because studies show that they'll earn more and they'll be happier, and they'll be they'll generally have a nicer life.
Yeah, well, Vincent, you're a man. I don't know what your status is relationship-wise at the moment, whether you cohabit with a partner, but in your experience, have you found that when you do, that kind of problem-shared mentality is something very helpful, because perhaps you don't talk about all the issues in your life with anyone else at any other time?
Oh, very much so. And I think it's not just the sharing of problems, it's your health and lifestyle and diet and fitness and all those sort of things. If you are on your own, you are much more likely to eat a convenience meal, you're less likely to prepare healthier food, probably less likely to do joint exercise things together. I mean, I notice some of the gyms around here will offer couples membership as a cheaper option, and the same goes for travel. As I said earlier, it's another huge benefit. If you're travelling as a couple, you will save an awful lot of money. There's no doubt, I think, if you're in a happy relationship, but certainly from a male point of view, it certainly does make you healthier, because you've got somebody else looking after you. I mean, famously, there's a medical cliche, isn't there, about how men are very reluctant to go and get tested at the doctors for all sorts of things, and somebody in their 50s, I could probably do with a nudge to get along to the GP to go and do certain things, and it tends to be the woman or the partner in your life that suggests that you do those sort of things. So for a variety of reasons, I'm sure that in a loving, committed and happy relationship, you are better than being single, although I would say in defence of singledom, you're never alone as much alone as with somebody you don't want to be with. So you've got to be in the right relationship.
I didn't want to be rude. So, I mean, is that basically your experience? You're happier being single? Is that your situation now?
Well, I think, yes, happier being single than with the wrong person, I think, but then happier being in a relationship with the right person. But that's fairly obvious, I suppose.
And that's actually one of the things, one of the drawbacks of the study, it just didn't look into the quality of the relationships. But there have been other studies that suggest that, being in a relationship with the wrong person is really, really bad for you. So, it makes you unhappy. So, I think it's a pity in a way that we don't know more about that side of things.
Do you think it matters that it's on the political spectrum seen as a more conservative thing to be in a long-term relationship? Do you think that matters when people look at the benefits to them of being or not being in a relationship? People will see this as being forced into doing something that's conservative.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a problem. Many young feminists still see marriage as a kind of throwback from an era where women were forced into it. And they had no prospects outside of marriage. So it's still got that sort of slight taint. And I think it's really difficult to sort of have this conversation in a way that makes women, in particular, not feel like they're being forced to do something that they don't want to do. So I think it's really difficult. This taps into a bigger conversation about how divorce or the breakdown of the family has been seen by some people as something that's really advantaged elites. So, if elites can kind of get out of relationships quite easily without, having the most horrific process.
Well, again, because they can sort of afford to, right?
Exactly, they can afford to. But there's been this kind of a body of kind of argument and evidence that actually family breakdown has been really terrible for working class people. And that down that end of the kind of class scale and the income scale, it's really disadvantaged children growing up in families where both partners are not there. The study kind of taps into that whole really a total minefield area. Divorce rates do seem to be plateauing in the UK.
I mean, Leaf, you've chosen this as your story of the week. What do you think this will have as in terms of implications for all of us? A study like this that says more of us should be married. Do you think marriage is a trend that might continue to grow?
Yeah, actually. I mean, I do think that that we're kind of seeing a cultural slight resurgence of interest in marriage. And my hope is that not necessarily, actually getting married officially, but that people will see the appeal of staying in long-term relationships, partly in thanks to a kind of increasing body of evidence, of which this study is one part.
And money no object, Gary, what would be your dream wedding?
I have to say my own, don't I, that I've already had. So I have to
You
say...
probably do literally have to say your own.
The old Jacobean house that I got married at, and yeah, with all friends and family there, and had a wonderful time. So yeah, I can't get any better than the wedding that I've already had, can I?
Vincent, do you still have in the back of your mind the chance that one day you're going to have your dream wedding?
Oh, yes, but I think it's much more likely to be one of those rather cliched, the Vegas or some strange destination, something a bit unusual potentially. Fewer people, more exotic destination. I think the older you get, the more selfish you get. So I think it'd be all about me and the other person and slightly less about the guests, which I know, of course, it's supposed to be.
I got married with just a few guests in Gibraltar, so I don't know if that qualifies as exotic, but it definitely qualifies as strange.
I think it does.
And Leaf, what about you? I mean, you've just had a wedding this year. Was it your dream?
Yeah, it was actually. It was totally lovely, and I really enjoyed it.
There we are. Even just talking about weddings means that you can't be depressed. My thanks to Leaf, Vincent and Gary. You can follow this show for free. You can get every episode as soon as it's released. Just search for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts and then tap follow. You can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription if you go to theweek.com/subscriptions. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer, Ollie Peart at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.